A leaked U.S. plan imagines Gaza as beachfront property. But PA Chief Mahmoud Abbas is praising the October 7th massacre. Hamas still won't disarm, and no one wants to send troops. Can President Trump's Gaza dream survive the reality on the ground? We take you inside the discussion on this week's Jerusalem Minute. Welcome back to Jerusalem Minute here on JNS TV. My name is Josh Haston, correspondent for JNS News. I am on the other side of the world. Alex Trayman, CEO of JNS, is in studio. Alex, good to see you this week.
Good to see you, Josh. I finally have the studio to myself.
Enjoy it, and hopefully I'll be back there next week. But you're going to be traveling once again. We're going to get to that in just a few minutes. But first, thousands gathered in Sydney, Australia at Bondi Beach to mark the week anniversary of the mass shooting there, the terrorist attack in which 15 were murdered, dozens more injured. Here we are, Alex, a week later after that horrible attack.
Yeah, and I think that this attack is going to be a turning point, really, in Australia. And in some ways, very similar to the turning point that I think was in the United States on September 11th. And obviously, that attack was much larger in scale, but we did see, to a certain extent, America turn on that day. And I think this also it's more than just an attack. I'm seeing the outpouring of support within Australia for the Jewish community. You're hearing the Jewish community rise up, and obviously this attack came after years of warnings about growing danger to the Australian Jewish community. We heard that the chance of globalize the Intifada. And now all of a sudden we're seeing Prime Minister Albanese saying that they're going to try to ban that phrase, globalize the Intifada. That's something that we talked about last week. When you say globalize the Intifada, this is exactly what you mean. And I think that this is going to be a turning point one way or the other. Now, it's possible that Australia is going to use this as a wake-up call, and they're going to figure out what they need to do to protect the Jewish community. Or it more likely possibility is that this is an attack that's going to be the continuation, the beginning of a continuation, whereby the Jewish community is going to find itself in greater and greater danger in the months and years ahead, similar to what we've seen in places like France and elsewhere around the world.
Yeah, the writing was certainly on the wall. Unfortunately, the leadership there did not take action against those homegrown terrorists and those who infiltrated into Australia over the years. Turning to the local scene in Israel, Alex, big news this week. Israel approves a $34 billion natural gas deal with Egypt. Our neighbors to the south, Prime Minister Netanyahu calling a press conference this past week announcing the deal. How significant is this deal for Israel, both financially and in terms of the diplomatic relations that Israel does have with Egypt, which Israel's had a peace deal with since 1979.
Well, on the one hand, this is a true moment of tremendous development for the state of Israel. Remember, when the state was founded, this was a resource-poor country. And we see now over the last 2 decades that Israel has found and exploited natural gas off the Mediterranean coast. And it's now becoming a major exporter of natural gas. Now, you're asking a few questions here. Number one, what does this do for the state coffers? This is a $34.5 billion deal over the next 14, 15 years, basically. And a lot of that money is going to go into state coffers. And we know that Israeli energy costs are relatively low, even though the cost of energy is going up in Israel, just like the cost of everything else is going up in Israel. As regards to its relations with Egypt, we provide water to Jordan, to our east. We're now providing natural gas to Egypt, to our southwest. It used to be that Egypt provided natural gas from Sinai to Israel, and it wasn't until they violated the peace agreement that we have with Egypt that they were providing natural gas to Israel. So now we're seeing the spigot is flowing in reverse. And what does that do? On the one hand, obviously, Israeli leaders are saying how this kind of glues the peace together, but it's a very cold peace. Jordan gets water that it is desperate for from the state of Israel. Does the Jordanian leadership continue to incite against Israel and incite its public to hate Israel? Yes, they do. Does the Egyptian public hold Israel favorably? No, they do not. That's also because the leadership in Egypt does not gently steer its population to recognize that it's important to maintain at least a normalized peace with Egypt. So, I don't know that this is going to change the game the way I wish that I think, or that the leadership is talking about how it could change the relations between Israel and Egypt. I think Egypt's just going to take the natural gas. They're going to give money if they pay. And we're not necessarily going to see a change in the views towards Israel on the street. Now, on the one hand, this turns Israel into a natural gas exporter, and that's a big deal on the one hand. On the other hand, what you want Israel to be, and we saw this as a lesson of the war, is that Israel needs to be independent in every way. Israel needs to be food independent, Israel needs to be weapons independent, and Israel needs to be energy independent. And certainly the companies that, invested a lot of money to help Israel exploit this natural gas, get it to the surface and get it to the point where it can be consumed. They want to get a payback as fast as possible. So they want to see Israel exporting this natural gas to other countries in exchange for commercial contracts. But there's a good argument could be made. What on earth is Israel doing exporting its natural gas? Especially as we hear the prime minister talking about Israel stepping into the age of artificial intelligence. One thing that we know about artificial intelligence is it takes an extraordinary amount of energy in order to process. This quantum computing, it takes immense amounts of energy. And here you have Israel that has, on the one hand, large quantities of natural gas out in the ocean, but on the other hand, somewhat limited quantities of natural gas. Now, the prime minister does say he believes there's more gas off the ocean, and I think that there's many reasons to believe that you could find additional natural gas off the coast of the Mediterranean. But you might think that it's in Israel's long-term interest to maintain its natural gas reserves so that you can basically power Israel's needs for decades on into the future.
Alex, at the same time, another deal announced this week between Israel and Germany. Germany is investing in the Arrow 3 air defense system designed to intercept ballistic missiles. Israel has that technology, those capabilities. The deal is $3.1 billion, according to the Israeli Ministry of Defense spokesperson. So another major deal announced this week, Alex.
Yeah, this is important for Germany because they do view Russia and its arsenal of missiles as a threat. Even they can look at Iran's ballistic missiles as a potential threat to the European continent. It was only a few months ago that you heard Germany talking about an arms embargo of Israel. And then sure enough, as the ceasefire was declared in the Gaza Strip between Israel and Gaza, then you heard Germany's leadership say, okay, we're going to reconsider. There might not be an arms embargo. But here you see the value that Germany and other countries find in Israeli technology. And I think that what you'll see in the future is that as Israel moves towards being more weapon systems independent, as they get off of the direct support from the United States, that will make them freer to develop their own technologies, to invest in their own technologies that are developed in the state of Israel or manufactured wherever else they might be manufactured around the world, in India or in other places. And you're going to have this Israeli startup mentality working even in hyperdrive with defense technologies. And then you will see Israel really becoming a major exporter of defense technologies to other countries around the world. So I think that this is just one contract, a $3.1 billion contract. And it just is the tip of the iceberg in terms of what's possible if Israel develops advanced weapon systems and has the ability to sell them around the world.
Alex, let's take a look at Gaza right now. This past week, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio saying that the Trump administration will have to clarify the mandate of the International Stabilization Force. We've talked about that force before. Let's check out this video.
Well, look, in fairness to all the countries we've talked to about being and having a presence on the ground, I think they want to know specifically, what the mandate, what the specific mandate it was, the funding mechanism looks like. We're trying to make a lot of progress here with I think the next step here is announcing the Board of Peace, announcing the Palestinian Technocratic Group that will help provide daily governance. And then once that's in place, I think that will allow us to firm up the stabilization force, including how it's going to be paid for, what the rules of engagement are, what their role will be in demilitarization and so forth.
So there you have the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, talking about phase 2 of the agreement, saying there's no future with UNRWA. We discussed how the U.S. wants to label UNRWA a foreign terrorist organization. Also, Hamas disarmament a must. The details need to be negotiated. Hamas, of course, not willing to disarm, which could prevent any sort of movement towards phase 2.
Well, first of all, I think for Israel, very good to see that it is, in fact, Secretary of State Marco Rubio that is leading the diplomacy efforts here on moving this agreement from phase 1 to phase 2, because I think of all the people that are involved in the U.S. administration, Marco Rubio is the one that Israel can say really is aligned more than anyone. And so better to hear Rubio talking about this than to hear Witkoff or Kushner or others. And I'm not saying that they're not pro-Israel. I think that they are. But we do see that Witkoff and Kushner certainly have close ties with Qatar. Rubio seems to really be much more closely aligned with Israel. So on the one hand, very, very good that it's Rubio leading here on this effort. What he said about UNRWA, completely right. I mean, UNRWA, we talked about it last week, really basically an agency of Hamas with UN backing. The fact that they're not going to be a part of it, that's definitely a big step forward. I do sense that the Trump administration is feel some kind of sense of urgency to see if they can move this from phase 1 to phase 2. And, we're talking about the creation of this Board of Peace. We're talking about the creation of this international stabilization force. At this point, it's not yet 100% clear who will be on this international stabilization force. So the latest reports I heard is that Pakistan may be a country that would send troops over along this force. And even in the past, we've been talking about whether or not Pakistan could be one of those countries that might be willing to normalize relations with Israel at some point. Now, again, that's a country where I don't think that the whole street of Pakistan is, viewing Israel as a best friend, but certainly Pakistan far enough away that there was never a direct conflict between Israel and Pakistan. So that might be one country that can come in, but there's big questions about what this International Stabilization Forces mandate is going to be. Do they have an open fire mandate? Can they, if they see Hamas terrorists, or can they take them out? Can they demand that Hamas disarms? What is going to be the role of this International Stabilization Force? And the fear always for Israel, as we've seen with like UNIFIL in southern Lebanon, is that basically these are international forces that go into a place and their primary mandate is to stop Israel from defeating terrorists, right? So terrorists in southern Lebanon, this entire buildup of Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, which was a direct violation of UN Resolution 1701, that they were not supposed to be operating there. UNIFIL allowed them to operate, and they prevented Israel from striking in that area. So that's what Israel does not want to see here, and not yet clear what this mandate is going to be. Rubio saying that before you can expect troops to come in from any country, it's going to have to be clear what that mandate is. And it does look like Israel has some sort of a veto over who those countries might be. We know that Turkey, for example, wants to put troops into Gaza as part of this international stabilization force, and that has been a red line for Israel.
Yeah, Alex, so you have the international force there, and at the same time, you have countries reportedly joining the Trump Board of Peace. And I'm not exactly sure if the same countries who are potentially sending troops to that force are the same countries part of the Board of Peace. But this week, it was announced, or reported at least, that Egypt, Qatar, the UAE, the UK, Italy, and Germany have agreed, reportedly, to join the Trump Board of Peace. Of course, as you just said, Israel having problems with, of course, Qatar. Turkey, you mentioned also. I don't see their name on this list. But, I mean, if this is accurate, it does seem problematic, especially when you're talking about establishing peace, when you have some of these entities, Qatar and others, who actually are harboring Hamas and have been harboring Hamas. And it's also very unlikely, as we've said in the past, that this international force would actually take up arms against Hamas. So let's get into, I guess, these two different entities and some of these problematic countries.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a big difference in opinion in the U.S. and in Israel about the role and the good faith of Qatar. As far as Israel's concerned, Qatar is not a constructive actor here. But for the United States, you see the president accepted that plane from Qatar, or at least agreed to accept that plane from Qatar, claiming that Qatar is an ally, signing that executive order giving Qatar special status as a defense partner and an ally of the United States. So Egypt and Qatar, these are two countries that I think that Israel would not really want to be part of the International Stabilization Force. There was talk that Egypt would potentially send troops, but here we do see that they are going to be part of this Board of Peace. Now, the United Arab Emirates, that's a country that Israel would feel more comfortable with, having signed Abraham Accords deal with the Emirates. They were basically the first country to come in. Now, the other three are from Europe, and here you have Germany, which on the one hand, we just discussed, signed this major defense spending deal with Israel. And I think Israel does consider Germany to be an important ally in Europe, even though we saw that they were hedging a bit. Italy also seemed to be hedging a little bit. Giorgia Meloni, she's right wing. On the one hand, Israel would expect that this nationalist leadership of Italy would be very closely aligned with Netanyahu and his government. But we've also heard Giorgia Meloni say some things, which I think are disconcerting for Israel. The UK, another country, certainly under this Labour government, has not been pro-Israel. The foreign minister of the UK making statements, and I think they're very disappointing to Israel. But on the same token, what you don't see is France being admitted as a member of this Board of Peace. And France, I think, was the most pro-Palestinian of all those countries in Europe. So they're left off. It doesn't look like it's a great alignment, but remember that the chairman of this Board of Peace is going to be Donald Trump. And ultimately, I think it's going to be up to the United States. And we do hope that Marco Rubio and Trump play a big role in what the policies of this Board of Peace are going to look like. And if they do, if they succeed in being the ones that determine, what the future strategy of Gaza is going to be, if they then have the Emirates, Qatar, Egypt, Italy, Germany, UK as part of this board, and they can get those countries in line, that could potentially do a lot to repair Israel's status in the international community and get the rest of that international community off Israel's back with regard to the humanitarian situation and crisis that's now in Gaza, putting that burden of rebuilding, really solely and squarely on the United States and on this Board of Peace.
Alex, I was reading a hard copy of the Wall Street Journal over the weekend, and I saw images in an article there about Trump's potential vision for the future of Gaza, a really high-tech, state-of-the-art Riviera of the Middle East, as mentioned by President Trump time and time again, with high-speed trains and big, beautiful buildings or whatnot. And according to the Wall Street Journal, this proposal put together by Kushner-Witkoff called Project Sunrise, to be completed over 10 years, with these images, New Rafah, as it's called, being the seat of government for whom? I'm not sure. If you're talking about the Palestinian Authority, terrorists in suits, or I don't know, maybe part of this International Board of Peace, whoever will take over eventually. But again, this is, from what I understand, this is the first time that you actually see images of Trump's vision for a long-term future in Gaza.
Yeah, we've seen some of the mock-ups of what future Gaza could look like, with major international investment. Now, they're talking about this being a 10-year plan. It sounds to me like this could be way more than 10 years in the making, if you could even get to it. And of course, what I think this 10-year plan depends on is Hamas and terror organizations not being inside Gaza, not being the ones that are operating and authorizing and administering the Gaza Strip. So the question is, do you eventually get Hamas out? And who does that? Is this International Stabilization Force going to do it? Is Israel going to do it? I do think that there is some kind of an arrangement between Israel and the United States, where the United States is basically asking Israel for some time to see if they can put this international stabilization force together, to see if they can put this board of peace together, to see if such an international stabilization force can have a mandate to disarm Hamas, if they can be successful in that. But if they can't, then you will see the IDF going in. Now, one could also make a good argument that the status quo as it is right now is not so problematic, right? You have Israel in control of 53% of the Gaza Strip. You have them in control of that southern border between Gaza and Egypt. You have a buffer zone in the north. It's no longer that Hamas can be considered a real threat to the Israeli home front. Like I said, Israel controlling the whole eastern section of Gaza as well, and Hamas is in the western, almost 50% of Gaza. And yes, they're running around with machine guns and they are inflicting damage on the Gazan people. We saw they took out Abu Shabab, one of these clan leaders that the United States and Israel talked about taking some of this, what we call like Palestinian administrative control. And when we talk about a Palestinian technocratic government as being, part of that phase two, it's not clear who can be part of that if Hamas is running around with machine guns and taking the people out. But basically what you're going to have in that situation, again, is Israel controlling half the strip and, Hamas and the Gazans kind of like stewing in their own misery in the other half. And meanwhile, the onus of fixing this problem is on the United States and on this board of peace. We have to see if Hamas will be disarmed, if Gaza will be demilitarized. If that happens, and again, the question is who makes that happen. But if that does happen, if you can get some sort of peaceful, quiet, technocratic government in there, and Hamas no longer has weapons to terrorize their people, and then you get equipment in there to clean up the rubble, and it's going to take a long time to clean up the rubble in Gaza. Could you start to see some kind of a rebuilding? Yes. If you're going to rebuild, should you rebuild it as a model for what could be a future of the Middle East, looking at the United Arab Emirates as a model, looking at Qatar as a model? Yeah, that would be great. What's the chances of this actually happening? I think the chances right now are pretty low.
Yeah, absolutely, Alex. I mean, in 2005, that was essentially the plan when Israel pulled out 8,000 to 10,000 of its own civilians and all of our soldiers and, and dug up the bodies in hopes of peace, in hopes that the PA would turn Gaza into some sort of Riviera. That never happened.
That's what people pitched back in 2005, and that was really a pipe dream. I mean, even the idea that Gaza was going to become peaceful, let alone the Singapore of the Middle East, as they described it. There was no indication that the Palestinian Authority, which we see how they're governing in the Palestinian Authority-controlled areas and what's called the West Bank, what we call Judea and Samaria. There's no indication that Gaza was going to be any nicer than that. Here you do have an opportunity if you can sort of bypass the Gazans, you can bypass Hamas, you can bypass the Palestinian Authority. If other forces come in here, the Emirates and Qatar and the United States, and say, look, this is what we're doing. Basically you're talking about a blank slate in Gaza right now. The whole thing is a demolition zone, as the president said already a year and a half ago in the White House. So you're going to have to clear out this demolition zone and something's going to have to be rebuilt. So then there's two options. You can start to bring in, like these, low-income housing, and go that model and just build houses for people, like or apartments or whatever it is, caravans for the population. Or you can say, no, if we're going to build and we're going to invest and we're going to spend the billions of dollars anyways, then we should do it in the highest technological fashion and actually try to turn it into this Riviera of the Middle East. But it looks like, again, that it's very difficult for the United States right now, Marco Rubio, Trump, to get to even this next phase. And they're even talking about what does that mean that Hamas disarms? They're saying, okay, how much can we convince Hamas of which weapons it's going to give up? Certainly we want them to give up the heavy weapons, the rockets, the RPGs, things like that. But, I guess we'll let them have some machine guns and things like that. Look, as long as they're able to terrorize a society, you're not going to get any of this type of multi-billion-dollar remake. You're not going to have any kind of a smart city in Gaza. It would be great if we can just get a quiet city.
Yeah, and I would argue the Palestinian Authority is not the future for Gaza. The Palestinian Authority, as I said before, terrorists in suits. And now we have this report indicating that, in fact, Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the PA, called the October 7th massacre the greatest day in so-called Palestinian history. I'm not exactly sure what Palestinian history is, but we could talk about that as well. But let's check out this video.
شيء مش مشاع. حتى الرئيس يعني إنه قال إنه هذا أعظم يوم بالتاريخ الفلسطيني. ولكن وهذا قاله قدام عشرات مش قدام شخص أو شخصين.
So again, comments made by Mahmoud Abbas to an interviewer from the Palestinian Center for Policy Research and Strategic Studies, saying October 7th was the greatest day in their history. And if that's who he is, then we know what to expect if the PA plays any role in the future of Gaza. We know what the PA is all about in Judea and Samaria. Terrorists in suits who continue to carry out their pay-to-slay program. That is who they are.
I think that's really correct. And when you talk about the greatest day in Palestinian history, what does that mean? I mean, look, Palestinian history, it's all based off of Israel. All of Palestinian history, anything that you've heard about Palestinian history, it all is Israel in the other half of that sentence. On the one hand, you have the Nakba in 1948 as being the first memorable day in the Palestinian history calendar. You know, you have the importing of Yasser Arafat and the signing of the Oslo Accords. You know, these are, you know, basically it's wars, it's terrorism, it's intifadas. This is the Palestinian history. And so it's no surprise here that Mahmoud Abbas said that, October 7th was the greatest day in Palestinian history. Of course, it wasn't even his own Fatah that pulled it off. It was Hamas, and he's afraid that Hamas would win an election and kick him out. Now, we know that Mahmoud Abbas is not the future. In fact, he's in year 20 of his 4-year term. I think he's coming up on 90 or just turned 90, actually, I believe. Several weeks ago, he turned 90. And the question is, like, can we get to a day after Mahmoud Abbas? And can we get somebody who's not Mahmoud Abbas's number 2 henchman or number 3 henchman to be the future of the Palestinian Authority? And I don't really suppose right now that there's any kind of like legitimate Palestinian leadership that is pro-Israel. Not that they have to like Israel, not that they have to wish that Israel was here, but recognize that Israel is here, recognize that that's their reality, recognize that they don't have any peace in this region without Israel, and therefore it's in their best interest to work together with Israel. If you could find that person, and then you would not have a Fatah or a Hamas that's coming to take these people out, you know, maybe you could get to some kind of peaceful reconciliation. You know, I personally think that the only way that that's ever going to happen is under full Israeli sovereignty. You know, if Israel is the only one that can protect the Israeli citizens, and quite frankly, is the only one that can protect Palestinian citizens from these terrorists. But we have to see if who takes over the Palestinian Authority. We have to see if we get to phase 2 in Gaza. Meanwhile, there's no indication. What we're not hearing is the voices coming out of the Palestinian people, both in the Judea and Samaria, West Bank, and or Gaza, saying that October 7th was the worst day in Palestinian history. When you have people coming out and saying that October 7th was the worst day in Palestinian history, that's when you'll be on the step towards peace.
On cue, Alex, President Trump this week adding the Palestinian Authority, along with Syria, to the U.S. visa restriction list, a presidential proclamation expanding full and partial bans on 19 countries. President Trump, I'm not exactly sure the reasoning behind it or the explanation. Maybe you've heard something in terms of why the PA was added to this list along with Syria. A little bit surprising, I would say, the fact that President Trump just several weeks ago had a very chummy meeting with al-Julani, the head of the new Syrian government.
Well, I mean, certainly Trump hopes that al-Julani can be a force for moderation in Syria. But here, I mean, it says that the Secretary of State, Attorney General, Homeland Security Secretary, and Director of National Intelligence determined that the countries in question and the Palestinian Authority, important to note that Palestinian Authority is not considered a country by the United States, but it says that the countries in question and the Palestinian Authority, quote, cannot meet basic criteria for identifying their nationals and residents who pose national security and public safety threats and for sharing that information with the United States. So basically, what the United States is saying is, we know that there's terrorists running around your neighborhoods. And we're blocking any entry of Palestinians coming into the United States, just like from any other country, because quite frankly, we have no way of knowing from you or trust from the Palestinian Authority that they can communicate to the United States, who are these people, right? So the United States certainly doesn't want to have any kind of terrorists coming into its country, and that's why they're doing that block. And I think that really lends to, tells you something else you need to know about why no countries have opened up their borders to Gazans, okay, right? You have a humanitarian crisis in Gaza. In any other situation in the world where you'd have a humanitarian crisis like that, you would have had people fleeing for the border and seeking refuge in other countries. But meanwhile, the entire world shut their borders to Gazan residents. And that's for two reasons. Number one is like this, that the United States is saying, we don't want terrorists coming into our country. And when you have a country which is governed by Hamas, which is governed by a terrorist entity, very high probability that people that are going to leave that country are associated with Hamas, that they've been raised as terrorists. And no country really wants to have terrorists now running around inside their country, like we're seeing all over the world today. Nobody wants more terrorists running around their country. But the other part of it is that, of course, that the international community wants the Gazan people and the humanitarian crisis in Gaza to be Israel's problem. So they want to hold it there as a lever against Israel so they can continue to cite against Israel in the United Nations, so they can continue to push boycotts, sanctions, and divestment against Israel, and they just can continue to delegitimize and demonize the state of Israel. So, these are the reasons. And on the one hand, I understand what President Trump is doing. On the other hand, how are we going to get Gazan residents that are suffering inside Gaza to safer pastures, especially if Gaza doesn't get rebuilt in the next 10 years, like we're talking about, into some kind of a smart city and Riviera on the Mediterranean?
Alex, last week we mentioned that 3 Americans were killed in Syria by a Syrian with ties to ISIS. In response, President Trump and the administration hitting more than 70 targets, called Operation Hawkeye Strike, which Trump calls a very serious retaliation. Israel reportedly given the heads up there. So the U.S. striking ISIS targets in Syria in response to the fact that 3 American citizens were killed this past week.
Also important to note that the president's talking about these being ISIS operatives inside Syria and trying to distance those operatives from al-Jawani, right? And al-Jawani basically saying that he is in favor of the U.S. attacks in Syria, but there are people that are suggesting that this is ISIS and al-Jawani is not two different entities here. So on the one hand, United States, taking vengeance, retaliating for the killing of 3 Americans. On the other hand, I think this is a pretty good indication that Syria is not yet a stable zone, and that much work has to be done to root out terrorism from Syria. Big questions as to how much patience President Trump has for al-Jawani. Hearing rumors that his patience with Jawani may run out at some point in the future, and will run out even quicker if Americans continue to die inside of Syria.
Alex, as we mentioned at the beginning of the show, I am in the States. You are in Israel. Next week, we're going to reverse that, as you are planning to get on a plane, traveling, accompanying Prime Minister Netanyahu on his trip to visit President Trump. Apparently, the formal schedule has not been introduced, but the fact that you're getting on a plane, I think headed to Florida, indicates that the Mar-a-Lago resort indicates that meeting is in fact going to happen. In what capacity, we don't know yet. But it looks like Netanyahu is going to be meeting with President Trump, and Alex Trayman is going to be there.
Well, it sounds like President Trump opened up Mar-a-Lago as a vacation destination over the holidays to Prime Minister Netanyahu. An indication that Trump is probably going to be there as well. Gave the invitation to Netanyahu to come enjoy Mar-a-Lago. Not too many places that the prime minister can go, quite frankly, these days without a threat of being arrested after those warrants issued by the International Criminal Court over a year ago. Trump stating, as only Trump would, that there's not a formal meeting on the agenda, but stating that Netanyahu would like to come and see him. I have a feeling somehow or another the prime minister and the president will find time to meet if the prime minister and his wife are staying at Mar-a-Lago. And certainly they have a lot to discuss. We saw all these conversations we were talking about regarding phase 2 of this plan in Gaza. There was also reports that just came out stating that Netanyahu was going to try to convince Trump that there should be future attacks against Iran during that meeting. I think that you see here very clearly that the situation in Gaza is not resolved. The situation in southern Lebanon, not completely resolved. The situation in Syria, not stable. And that more can potentially be done to strike at the heart of the Iranian regime, and potentially that there might be some intelligence regarding Iranian attempts to restart their nuclear program that all might be on the conversations that Netanyahu may have with Trump next week.
Alex, I saw some of the videos over the weekend from the Turning Point USA event, Charlie Kirk's organization there. Ben Shapiro attacking Tucker Carlson for platforming the anti-Semite Nick Fuentes, along with Candace Owens, of course. Let's check out this video.
He knew that Nick Fuentes is an evil troll and that building him up is an act of moral imbecility. And that is precisely what Tucker Carlson did. He built Nick Fuentes up. And he ought to take responsibility for that, just as he ought to take responsibility for glazing pornographer and alleged sex trafficker Andrew Tate, or for mainstreaming fake historian and pseudo-Nazi apologist Daryl Cooper as America's best and most honest popular historian. Hosts are indeed responsible for the guests they choose and the questions they ask those guests. Emotive accusations, conspiracy theories, and just guessing questions, that's lazy and stupid and misleading. None of them are a substitute for truth. None of them are a substitute for evidence. So, when Candace Owens says, "I don't know, but I know," that is retarded. And we are all more retarded for having heard it. And the people who refuse to condemn Candace's truly vicious attacks, and some of them are speaking here, are guilty of cowardice. Yes, cowardice.
So there you have it, Alex. What some are calling a civil war, if you will, amongst the right wing or conservatives in the United States. You have on one side Ben Shapiro, on the other you have Carlson, Candace Owens, and others. Steve Bannon calling Shapiro a cancer who wants the U.S. to put Israel's interests first. So what can we make of this chaos here at the Turning Point USA event?
Well, certainly what we're seeing here at TPUSA is, just how ugly the situation is inside of the MAGA camp right now. And there is, I wouldn't call it a civil war, but certainly, a war of words taking place here between those pro-Israel in the MAGA camp and those that are decidedly anti-Israel in the MAGA camp. And what's amazing about it is that, Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, Steve Bannon, these were people that, certainly with Candace and Bannon, we would have thought just a year and a half ago that they were pro-Israel, that they had, many pro-Israel bona fides. And, Tucker, we would have said a year and a half ago, and many people would have said, he's not an anti-Semite. There were some people who were warning that he was an anti-Semite. I was taken for surprised by that personally. But they've been platforming Nick Fuentes. We talked about it previously, that we're seeing that Nick Fuentes and his posts are getting, they're getting boosted on social media in ways that are unnatural and really shouldn't happen. And we're also seeing that his views are getting platformed by people like Tucker Carlson in ways that somebody like Nick Fuentes never would have gotten platformed in the past. You do see people like Ben Shapiro, Mark Levin, and others fighting back. And it's been getting pretty harsh right here. Now, one of the things which I thought was very interesting was that Erica Kirk said at the Turning Point USA conference that, she would put her support behind J.D. Vance to be the 48th president of the United States. And also clear here that Tucker Carlson and Vance are close. The Tucker Carlson supported J.D. Vance to become senator. I believe back it was 2022 that it's been rumored that Tucker Carlson may have convinced Donald Trump to pick J.D. Vance as his running mate in the previous election. We know that Tucker Carlson's son, Buckley, is J.D. Vance's communications advisor. And we know that immediately after Charlie Kirk's assassination, that the first person to host Charlie Kirk's show on that next Monday was J.D. Vance. And who did he have on? Tucker Carlson. And on that program, Tucker Carlson talked about how disgusting he thought it was that Netanyahu would have been talking about how pro-Israel Charlie Kirk was, which Charlie Kirk was pro-Israel. So you see here that they are very much trying to wrestle Turning Point away from what was a decidedly pro-Israel outlook. And I think ultimately what's happening here, and if this continues, is you're going to see really the MAGA movement implode, honestly. I mean, because if you see Tucker Carlson turning around a few weeks back and saying, nothing that he hates more than Christian Zionists. I mean, these are evangelical Christians who believe as part of their faith that supporting Israel is supporting the Bible, is supporting Christianity, that they believe that, those who bless Israel will be blessed and those who curse Israel will be cursed. I think they're tearing apart the movement. And the idea that Republicans can beat Democrats if they're not united, that's fool's gold. So I think ultimately, this could even be an operation to try to get the Democrats in power by just trying to split the movement. Unfortunately, what they're doing is they're using Israel as a political football, which is exactly what Israel doesn't want to be. And in the past, we always talked about this being a football between the Republicans and the Democrats. And now, forget about the Democrats. They've punted all the way to the Republicans. And now the Republicans are using Israel as a political football within the MAGA camp.
Alex, we have time for one other story here. I don't know if you saw this yet. The Ami Horowitz video at San Francisco State University. Ami Horowitz always exposing the haters and anti-Semites and those who support terrorism, especially on college campuses. Let's check out this shocking video.
Money for arms and weapons to fight back against the Jews, operations against the Jews, but around the world, in France, in Germany, here, in Britain, wherever they are, but here and in Europe, we want to raise arms so we can strike them all over the world. We have to hit these people hard. Yeah. And we want to fund operations against soft targets. You agree with what I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah. But yes, I would totally be down.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
yeah, bro, I agree with you.
I mean, you understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
By hitting these targets?
Yes.
I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I like what you're saying. I would love to help.
You want to spread the word too? Or?
Spread the word for sure. Thanks, guys. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
God bless you.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't have money to give, but if you need word of mouth,
moral support, you can give me.
Yeah.
And just spread the message.
Like promotions, like putting on a story or something.
How much money would you be able to do? It's tax deductible.
A couple bucks.
Like $5.
Still $5? Like $5.
$5.
So, Alex, it's a shocking video, but I would say, unfortunately, not surprising, where Ami Horowitz essentially asks these individuals to support attacks against Jews. And then you have these individuals who are willing to either donate to the cause. You're talking about attacking Jews or support that movement in other ways. So very, very, again, shocking, but unfortunately not surprising. The reality that we have experienced since the October 7th massacre, where Jews have been targeted, hunting season on Jews across the world.
Well, first of all, bravo to Ami Horowitz for doing it again. I mean, he's been doing this as long as I know him. We're talking like something like 15, 20 years already. He's been going into the lion's den, wherever that is. He was waving an American flag during these encampments in City College just over a year ago, and now going to San Francisco State University and, just exposing really the way people feel about the United States, the way people feel about Jews, the way people feel about America. And this, it's not surprising, but I think what this video does is it demonstrates how lost, America has become, when we can, take this country, which is the beacon of religious freedom, which is a total melting pot in which Jewish Americans have contributed so much to the fabric of what it means to be an American. And the Jewish people in America, for the most part, I would say the overwhelming majority of them, they are high contributing members to American society, consider themselves high contributing members to American society. And even most of them would consider themselves to be American before they would consider themselves Jewish, right? If you had to pick, like, what are you first, American or Jewish? I think a lot of Jews in America would say American before they would say anything else, which is very different than Jews in other communities around the world where they're isolated and they know that they're Jewish first. This is a situation, and I think that these two stories here, what's going on at Turning Point USA on the one, being fueled by Tucker, Candace, Steve Bannon, on the one hand, they're accelerating this process very dramatically, but I think that maybe one of the reasons why they are accelerating this process is that they're looking at the young people in America and they're saying, look, the writing's already on the wall. Like, we're not going to go convince these people to support Israel and support Jews. They've been taught already to hate Jews and to hate Israel. And this was done by Qatar. This was done at the university level. This is being done on the grade school level already, where you have Title VI University Middle East Studies programs creating the curriculums for public schools. While we already knew what was going on the campus, not that we were doing anything about it, we were allowing the same problem to fester already in the public school level. So I think that this video, is very, very sad, and it basically, wraps back around to this first story that we had at the opening of this program, which is what happened in Australia at Bondi Beach, and what's happened in the UK, what's happened in France. And you just have to wonder, like, how safe is it going to be for Jews to live anywhere in the world? We're under attack in Israel, by Iran and all of its terror proxies. And obviously the Palestinians here, and the Qataris that have aligned with Iran, even though there's a Shiite-Sunni divide, but certainly what's happening in the West as well. Very, very scary situation, and not clear that any amount of counter anti-Semitism movements or money that gets thrown at this is going to solve this problem. This is a deep, deep spiritual problem that goes to the rot that's taking place in all of Western society. And I would just leave it with this. I mean, if these countries are not going to be good to their Jews, it's going to come back to hurt them, not just because of the blessings that they will lose from above, the spiritual blessings, which I honestly do believe, but, violent crime, as we see at Bondi Beach, it might start with Jews, it never ends with Jews. When violent crime rises, as it has in all these societies, Jews are on the front lines of that, but they're not the only recipients. We saw President Trump and his attempted assassination. We saw the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And I think it's dangerous season in all of Western society. And these last few stories, I think, really indicate that.
Absolutely, Alex. And I would say that Jews around the world, since it is hunting season against the Jewish people in all countries, it is time to defend yourselves. It's time to learn self-defense. It's time to learn arms training. And I think that's the answer really to anti-Semitism right now. Jews have to learn to defend themselves wherever they are, whether it's in Israel, the United States, Australia, all over the world. If you're Jewish, you are a target. You must understand that and know that. You have to be able to defend yourself with all these threats.
And that's the difference between Israel and other countries around the world, though. It's not that we're being attacked any less. It's just that we are willing to carry arms. We're willing to organize as a military. We're willing to use our brains to develop the technological advantages that we need to defeat our enemies. It's hard to know that Jews will be able to do that in other countries around the world, like in Australia, where there's a significant gun control. In the United States, where most Jews live in liberal states, and it's not easy to get permits to carry weapons. I know that more and more Jews in the United States are carrying weapons, but ultimately, I do think that the leadership of the United States has to look now at what happened has happened in the UK, what's happened in France, what's happening in Australia, and recognize that they have a last-ditch opportunity to save Western society by standing up for the safety of Jews in their countries, right? President Trump, he's got to stand up and say, look, if my own vice president, J.D. Vance, is supporting a movement that's turning against Jews, I'm not okay with that. MAGA should not be okay with that. MAGA is evangelical Christians. Evangelical Christians love and support Israel. Mike Huckabee, Rubio. These are examples of what MAGA is supposed to look like, not Tucker Carlson, not Candace Owens, not Steve Bannon. I really think that there's a big burden on the president of the United States here to stand up and take moral leadership.
Alex, on that note, I want to wish you a great trip traveling to the United States to cover the visit of Prime Minister Netanyahu with President Trump. Looking forward to opening the show next week with a report from your trip.
Thanks so much, Josh.
Want to give a shout out to the people behind the scenes here. Our producer, Zach Sickerman, our engineer, Ryan Lishitz, Esther Eden, Aaron Wogelantern, and Yuri Stretsky, station manager. Make sure you give us a super thanks on YouTube and donate today to JNS, and go to JNS TV for all the amazing programming offered. Go to jns.org for all the latest breaking news from Israel, the Middle East, and the entire Jewish world. We'll see you next week on Jerusalem Minute here on JNS TV.